President Ronald Reagan clearly believed that big government was a burden on Americans, but in the end he was more successful in increasing the size of the military than in shrinking domestic programs. Similarly, in the 1990s, the Gingrich-led Republicans talked about decentralizing and shrinking government, but they were easily painted by President Bill Clinton as misers who were threatening to shut down everyone's beloved public parks. They soon abandoned their efforts to cut spending, and government continued to grow. Under President George W. Bush, even the pretense that Republicans were trying to shrink government was largely abandoned. Bush entered office bragging that his first budget would grow government faster than the rate of inflation, as indeed it did, with 2 wars adding to expenses. Prescription drug coverage was added to the government's health responsibilities. There was a federal takeover of education. Pundits began to talk openly, sometimes enthusiastically, about big government conservatism. Some taxes were cut, but spending increased by the greatest amount since LBJ's Great Society. Regulations grew ever more complex. Conservatives seemed more interested in religious and military issues than in economic liberty or civil liberty. With the specter of terrorism looming over America, the Bush administration reinterpreted constitutional rules about the right to trial, habeas corpus, and domestic surveillance, almost on a whim. One undeniably tragic and horrific day became an easy excuse for shredding rights that had endured for centuries and for treating the Constitution as an inconsequential impediment. The contempt for the Constitution showed in large ways and in exasperatingly petty ones. Vice President Dick Cheney even attempted to avoid complying with one investigation by arguing that the office of the vice presidency was not a part of the executive branch. That would be news to the founders. The Bush administration showed less fidelity to the Constitution than any administration since Abraham Lincoln's. And the more government overgrows its traditional limits, the more it seems to reveal its ineptitude, whether in the surprisingly protracted wars in the Middle East or the bungled response to Hurricane Katrina. Disappointment among conservative voters contributed to Democratic victories in the congressional elections of 2006 and the presidential election of 2008, and afterwards President Obama and a Democratic Congress, responding to the ongoing financial crisis, embarked on a spending spree so massive, adjusted for inflation, that it dwarfs the New Deal spending, and if projected spending is not stopped, even the cost to the U.S. government of World War II. With neither major party interested in stopping the runaway growth of government, and broad public suspicion that government's cronies are receiving special treatment in all the bailouts and stimulus packages, activists have taken to the streets in massive Tea Party protests, reminding America of the act of rebellion in Boston Harbor that preceded the original American Revolution. This new movement includes many frustrated Republicans, but also a growing number of worried Democrats and independents, many of them newly aware that government has expanded far beyond its original constitutional mandate, and aware that neither the right nor the left in recent years has offered a solution. Remember, there were periods in our past when both conservatism and liberalism seemed to stand for limited government. Not so today. In the 19th century, liberals stood for smaller government and free markets. But in the 20th century, liberalism changed and became a sort of watered-down socialism. Conservatism arguably stood for smaller government and free markets in the 20th century. But by the time of the second Bush presidency in the 21st century, conservatism had become a philosophy of big government, barely distinguishable from modern liberalism. With turnover rates in elections low, and most government activity rooted not in ideology, but the simple, boring redistribution of money to the well-connected, there is now a Washington establishment that, for all intents and purposes, operates like a single, pro-government party. The Tea Party movement, though its rhetoric is often conservative-sounding, may be at heart neither right-wing nor left-wing. It is a fundamentally libertarian cry of exasperation at a government increasingly perceived to be spending away our futures and trampling our liberties and disregarding the rule of law? Will right and left alike learn from it and rediscover limits to government power? Will Americans instead abandon right and left to become part of a growing Tea Party movement? And what happens if the movement peters out and the final push towards something resembling socialism in the U.S. follows? This is a pivotal moment in American history, and this is the central struggle in modern American politics, the struggle that Freedom Watch will examine. From titanic battles over regulation and economics, to the everyday civil liberties violations that occur when government quietly breaks its own laws and railroads the innocent. Freedom Watch will function as your window overlooking the constant conflict between government and the individual, with the Constitution close at hand, and American history, from the Boston Tea Party to today's Tea Parties, always in mind. We will be a night watchman for your liberties, spotting the violations the government commits under cover of darkness. Join us for the new American Revolution.